What's shaking, cats and kittens? Rob Lee here for this month's presenting sponsor, Night Owl Gallery. Night Owl Gallery is an intimate, artist-run exhibition space showcasing the original paintings and fine art prints of Beth Ann Wilson. Also, it features curated goods from local artists and craftsmen. You'll be sure to find one-of-a-kind gifts, handcrafted jewelry, home decor items, along with a few vintage treasures. Located in the rear of 248 South Conklin Street in Highlandtown, across from the Sally O's, Night Owl Gallery is a unique space that brings together Wilson's love of the arts, community, and culture. Additionally, Night Owl Gallery hosts an array of arts and crafts workshops throughout the year and participates in community events, many of which are free and open to the public. So in this ever-changing world, safety is their priority. So feel free to join them and hit them up online at www.nightowl.gallery. Tell them Rob Lee sent you. Welcome to Getting to the Truth in This Art on MTR Podcast. I am your host, Rob Lee. And my next guest is an award-winning photojournalist based in Baltimore and the co-host of the photojournalism podcast, 10 Frames Per Second. We have Joe Giordano. Welcome to the podcast.
Hey, Rob. Thanks for having me.
So this is going to be great. I'm looking forward to this. And
me too.
Been following you for a while, and I've been doing this thing recently of checking to see who's who, because people out there, it's, you know how it is. Mm-hmm. And I mentioned, I was like, I'm interviewing Joe. I was like, oh yeah, that's going to be great. Look forward to it. It's going to be a good one.
We'll see.
So if you will, I kind of gave that 10,000 foot view, photojournalist, all of that. Describe your work. Describe what you're doing.
Well, I mean, I'm a freelance photojournalist. I also teach at Baltimore School for the Arts. I teach photography, black and white photography, dark room and printing. And developing at Baltimore School for the Arts. I do a lot of freelance work. I've shot for like The Guardian is, one of my clients. Locally, I shoot for Baltimore Brew. Right now, I've been concentrating more on a lot of my projects that I've been working on. I just had my book published, We Used to Live at Night, available at most of the fine bookstores in the city. So that was, knock on wood, that's been successful. I'm working on a couple of other projects. I got a show coming up at the Reginald Lewis Museum, a joint show coming up at the Reginald Lewis Museum that opens on July 10th. I'm part of a group that's honoring the late Robert Houston, the photographer who passed away about a month or so ago. So that's coming up. I'm very, very humbled. I know people use that word now, kind of like throw it out there. But I mean, really, when they asked me to be part of this, I was speechless for about 5 minutes because Robert documented the Poor People's Campaign under Dr. King. And I was asked because when I had taken a portrait of Robert and we talked a lot about the Poor People's Campaign, and he had encouraged me to keep on it, to keep photographing. And I photographed the 50th anniversary of the Poor People's Campaign. So my work is kind of bookending his earlier work. And then Devin and Dee, who are two other photographers, they're filling out the Baltimore scene. But mine's going to kind of just have to do with the DC marches and the Annapolis marches for the Poor People's Campaign. So that's going to be part of this group show that's opening at the Lewis on July 10th. Oh, wow. So that's pretty exciting. Yeah.
I like how the plugs are in there right there. I like that. That's coming up.
Well, that's what I'm up to. It's summertime. So as far as the freelance work, yeah. Like I just got a phone call today. I went down and covered the Cherry Hill Garden that the city's trying to evict. Right. So that's what I mean with freelance. I don't have stuff on the plate. It just, they call and I go, yeah. So those are the projects that I'm working on, so.
So let's go into some of these influences, right? So mm-hmm. Like, which photographers have influenced you, and how do they maybe influence your thinking, your photo work, and your career path as like more in a general, holistic kind of sense?
I think like my main influences I really love, and he tends to be an underrated photographer, but Roy DeCarava. Just his use of his eye for light, his eye for black and white shadows and highlights is unlike really any other photographer. He operated, in the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s in Harlem. His book, Sweet Fly Paper and Life, is a classic. They just reissued it. Anybody that's listening, you can get a copy of that. I think you can order it locally. I'm not going to say the A word. I encourage people to go to the bookstores and get it. It's out there to order. I got mine at the Museum of Art. They have one copy left, BMA. So he's really big. Italian photographer Paolo Pellegrin is one of my big influences. Diana Ferretto is one. I just really started getting to the work of LaToya Frazier because of my steelworker stuff, and she does this fantastic work with the small towns that she came from in Pennsylvania. I think it's Pennsylvania. So those are three. Brasai, for the nighttime work that I did, he's been a long time influence on my work. The Swiss photographer, Jacob Tugener, another nighttime photographer that I really look to for inspiration. But it changes all the time. I try not to be too stagnant, and I try to find new photographers, all the time. Especially with teaching, I try to keep things fresh. I try to, I tell my students, we get rid of the old white beardy men pretty quick. They have to, because, here's the inventors and they're gone. And then I try to really focus on the women photographers of color, that have been pushed out by really, this white supremacist, patriarchal, historical view of photography. I know all that sounds like a modern word jumble, but it's true.
No, it is.
It's true. When you look at the history of photography, it's been crafted by old white guys, right? Yeah. 4 old white guys. And
that's like a version of FUBU, but not good.
So in my class, I'm discovering new photographers all the time that I'm looking at work, and I'm just like, wow, thanks to Google, really, for just having archives and the Instagram account, Black Archives, like really looking up these different types of, from South Africa, from, the European continent, from everywhere I can pull the histories from. And that's influencing me. So in a roundabout way, my influences are always changing.
No, that's great. Like I look at it almost the same way. Like I think if you're passionate about what you're doing, you're always learning, you're always gathering, you're always getting some influence from various places. And I remember I was talking with, I believe, John Tyler, a musician, John Tyler, and he'd made the point that that his influences aren't solely in his particular craft. They are not like other guitarists, other people that are doing jazz. They may be more broad. So outside of folks in the kind of photography space and working with light and lenses and such, what are other influences that might be there that you're like, I'm really influenced by Daffy Duck or something along those lines, because people give you questions, but what would be some other influence that are outside of your specific line of work?
I like painting. I'm not very much into abstract painting. I'm more into kind of genre painting, scene painting with people in it doing something. I don't know why. I've always been attracted to that kind of scene painting stuff. I read a lot. So books are very influential into how I see things. I'm a comic book nerd, right? So, and I'm also a big kaiju nerd, but I don't think that really influences. I think the comic book panels probably hark back to why I like genre art, genre paintings, Hogarth and stuff like that. Because I like people like movement and doing stuff. I'm not that big into abstract work, but so a lot of outside influences definitely comes from reading about painters and scenes and paintings and things like that.
Yeah, we're going to talk about comics a little bit, probably. I didn't know that. Now I can throw a comic question in there.
Bring it on.
So how important is the lived experience to your work? Like, I find people are just, they may not be in the scene, they may not be aware of it. It may not be something that matters to them, especially in kind of a I was a freelancer at one point, so sometimes the mission, it didn't matter to me as much as the paycheck because I'm a freelancer. But how important is the lived experience and kind of having some skin in the game to the work that you're doing?
Well, I think, I mean, overall, like there's a very good paradigm shift happening, right? Like, I think now when we do, you know, especially with different communities, right? Like when it comes to subjects like trans, right? Or people with disability, I think people in those communities should take on those subjects, right? I think lived experiences bring a lot more to the table than an outsider coming in, like it used to be, right? You know, I just turned down, someone had asked me, I've suggested other people for jobs like that. I can't give too much away because it's a publication stuff, but I've referred people to jobs where I felt I'm not the right person for that job.
Sure.
I just have to be vague because someone got the assignment. So I don't want to blow anybody up because it's not out yet.
Yeah.
But I just want, you know what I mean? So I think lived experience is important in that way. But on, you know, also, I don't think you have to experience things to call attention to it.
Right.
Yeah. Like, you know, if like, I think the job of a photojournalist or a documentary photographer is to help people, right? Is to take pictures that make authority feel uncomfortable, right? There's a reason why cops beat up on photographers, right? And camera people. Yeah. You know, there's a reason for that because they don't want these stories out there, right? There's a reason that City Hall bans photographers or photographers can't go here, can't go there because they don't want you to see what's going on, right? They don't really care about the words too much as they care about the visual.
Yeah.
Right. So, you know, I don't think you have to be a corrupt politician to photograph corrupt politicians.
Right.
You know, you don't have to say, man, you know, I have people living in my alley that really need help. And I'm a photojournalist. If the city can help them, my pictures with their nowadays, you know, I try to be empathetic and work with the subjects and work with the people and not just parachute in, take pictures and leave.
Yeah.
Like I said, this is back to that paradigm shift and everything, right?
Yeah.
So I think it's important that photojournalists do come from communities sometimes for the stories. It brings more to it, right? Mm-hmm. Like I can't bring anything to the Black voguing scene like Shan Wallace can bring to the Black voguing scene, right? Like if somebody asked me, if I had a client ask me, hey, can you get this? I would not hesitate to give them Shan's number. I'd be like, let me give you this number because I'm not doing it. Really, you know, I mean, and that's no lie. I would straight up, you know, or Devin, you know, like, wait, you need to talk to Devin. Like, this is not my thing. So that paradigm has shifted, I think, hopefully through the industry.
Yeah.
But I do think you don't need lived experiences to call attention to ills in society, you know, to help other people.
I agree with that. I have a very similar take on that. I think there's just certain things. It's like, what's the goal? What's the aim here? And if the aim is to bring attention, then yeah, I think that's just doing the right thing and doing something that's ideal. But if it's kind of like, yeah, this isn't your scene. Like I always get weird about, I look at like criticism, right? Like music criticism or maybe film criticism. I don't want to get a critique from someone that's like, I hate horror movies, so here's my take on this horror movie. Hand it off to somebody else. That's not what you're equipped to do. And you're gonna already have like a bias or something that's baked in that's gonna make it less. It's not gonna make it as good as it can be. And it just leads to the distraction outside of the criticism or whatever the actual pursuit is there.
Movie critics and comic book films. Why do you go? Yeah. Just don't go. You know?
And that's the thing that's interesting. It's the thing that's interesting about that. Because I've been struggling with it because I don't need to watch a movie too often. I do a movie review podcast outside of this. And I don't have to go back too often for like comic book movies. It's rare that I go back and say, let me take a look at this. Let me rewatch this. But then I'm one of those people that get caught up in the whole movie magic thing. And I was like, if you like olds, as I like to call some of these directors that have their feelings like Scorsese and such, it's like, okay, fine. Does this not fall into movie magic that like they're making this thing happen? Like, don't completely just diminish it because it's not what you would do or how you would do it. I don't know.
Yeah, they're just old people, man.
Of your numerous travels and experiences, which ones come to mind when it's like this left a really big mark on me in my career?
Probably the work I did with, I mean, there's been like so much. I mean, you know, I was there and covered January 6th, right? The insurrection in January 6th. I didn't have a hard time fitting in. No, but I had two masks on. I was actually worried that they were going to yank my mask off.
Oh no!
More than the way because of the way I looked, but I mean, there were a couple of things at City Paper that really left, you know, like just getting to work. There isn't really one. I mean, you know, working with the homeless encampment underneath 83. But then you go back in hindsight, like, was that a good thing? You know, people did get medical help that they needed. You know, this one gentleman, Harrison Harvey, you know, I helped out. His foot was gangrenous, you know, and I helped get medical attention. I put the camera down. You got to put your camera down, right? You got to be a human first and a photographer second, right? Like I tell my students that, like, you know, you got to be a human being first. Like, it's not, you have to be. And if someone says, don't take my picture, then don't do it. Yeah. You know, just don't do it. Like this whole, you know, I agree with the freedom of the press and all this stuff, but you know, when you, especially when you're not from a neighborhood or you're not from an area, you're a guest in this house, right? And you should act accordingly. And this is what I tell my students, because I've met students from Micah, white, who have really get on this soapbox that they have a right to be there, right? And they have a right to take these pictures, and they don't have to leave. And that's just the wrong way to be, man. That's just the wrong way to be, you know? And, you know, when I go to different communities, like that's the attitude I have. Is like someone says, yo, don't take my picture. I don't take the picture. I'll keep talking to them. I just won't take the picture. You know, I'm not going to get scared and run off and not take the picture. But having an influence on, like, that had the most effect on me was, okay, I think the one that had was probably, I tracked down the oldest gambler at Pimlico Racecourse. This guy, Blue. He was 94 years old. And he'd been going to Pimlico every day since 1946. He just passed away. Wow. He just moved on last year, 2020. Yeah. And he walked. He lived in the you know, the old folks' home. It's at the end of Pimlico at the racetrack. Walked every day. And I talked to his daughter. I made a short film of him. It was in Baltimore Magazine. It wasn't for them. I did it myself. And then I asked if they wanted to run it. And they did. Graciously, it was a photo essay and a short film. And just like talking to him and everything he went through, segregation and the Second World War and everything, the 60s. Yeah. I mean, this guy was living history, just talking to this guy. But you saw it through his everyday dealings at Pimlico, you know? Like, it was such a great experience to talk to him. Like, I went there every day for like two almost 3 months just to talk to Blue, yeah. Right? Because and then it wasn't COVID that when I talked to his daughter, she said that his social network had just collapsed because that was his everyday thing, was going to Pimlico. Yeah. When he couldn't do it, he was just stuck in his house all alone. Yeah. And that's what, you know, that she thinks that may have contributed to his sickness. But that story probably had the biggest. I think about him a lot. And that's how I know something's stuck with me when, you know, like I think about him pretty much once a week, he'll pop into my head. So that was a long ass winded answer to your question.
No, that was a good one. You're spinning a yarn there. That was good. It's like if you
no dead air,
no dead air at all. This notion of like going there and to Pimlico and being there with someone pretty much every day, it's just like, for a couple of months, that's like a semester. It's just a semester of school. Yeah. So definitely it's going to leave some mark, especially when you're covering and you're producing content out of that's kind of covering this person and the stories that they're putting forth. So as a photographer, how do you see Baltimore? Loaded question, I know.
Yeah, I mean, Baltimore, flat out, I mean, Baltimore is an apartheid city, right? It's if you don't see that, to quote my favorite Greek philosopher, Flava Flav, I got nothing for you, man.
Nice.
Really, because of, if you read The Black Butterfly, if you read Doc Brown's book, if I've known him for a while, when he and we've talked about this before the book came out. So, The White Owl and The Black Butterfly. If you can't see how the city's divided up, I got nothing for you.
Yeah.
I mean, and I see Baltimore, the role of a photojournalist in this city, I think, is just to keep on City Hall. We have these problems. We have lead, man. We have, the city's got, one of the stories, and I don't know if you're going to ask this later on, but one of the stories that I really want to work on that nobody's covering is the city's high AIDS rate. Like that gets, things like that get pushed aside, but that gets in the face of the mayor and gets in the face of city council. And that's where I think, the superpower of good documentary photography comes in. I don't care about awards. I don't work for the New York Times. I don't work for the Washington Post. I'm not in this for that. Right. The only reason I have on my website, my biography, the places you publish, the reason I have that is so I can get work. I mean, I have to get paid, I have to work, but I don't submit to award stuff. The Brew does with stories that I'm attached to, but I don't do image awards and things like that. I just really want to get these photo stories out there, like I want to work on that. So that, that's where Baltimore is. Baltimore has some serious systemic problems, I think. And, I think some of them can be addressed. Like, okay, so for instance, like, we went, and like this farm today, right? We went down to this farm and they're getting evicted. Hopefully, all this coverage and the pictures and things will make housing change their mind. Who knows?
Yes.
Right. Maybe we can do something good, because this farm it's a fantastic spot in Cherry Hill, and it's community and it's great, and it needs to stay there. If not, it's going to be a parking lot, man. Yeah. So that's how I see Baltimore. I see Baltimore as it's an apartheid city, and the inequities are huge. And you see it. I saw it under the curfew with, during the uprising, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I have pictures. I have a series of one guy who was essentially kidnapped by the National Guard up by Penn North. He's walking home from work. They picked him up, carried him. I got these series. Me and Baynard Woods were there at this corner. Yeah. We were the only ones there because we basically told the curfew to off. Yeah. So we kept going around. And they carried this guy into a Hummer and took off. And we were trying, hey, where are you going? Where are you going? This guy in this New Jersey National Guard, wasn't even local. Pushing us, shoving us, telling us to get. By the time he got done pushing us, they were gone. So we had nothing. So we drove to Canton. There's white joggers, high National Guard, running by the CVS. Yeah. This is 1 a.m. You don't have to tell you, right? It's not. I'm not surprised. I'm just saying what we saw, right? I'm not surprised. I'm not like, I saw these things. I'm just saying, when the kids were out in Hamden sitting in that park,
yes,
all these code words at the overhead. They're going to go to central booking with who. With these white, you know what I mean? Like they were using these code words. And it's ridiculous how the city split up like that.
I remember when that went down, my partner was joking about it. She was like, I feel like you were in a Mobb Deep video, because I had like a bunch of weed on me, and I was coming from an acupuncturist appointment, and my Ubers wouldn't come into the city. So it was like 8:58 And I was like, oh, this acupuncturist ran a little over. I was like, isn't the curfew like 9? I was like, oh shit. And I didn't have a good ID. I let it lapse. So I was like, I've got issues to sort out. So I'm like probably about 20 minutes away from my apartment at the time. And I'm just running down back alleys just so I couldn't encounter and run into the police. I'm a 6'4" black man. I was like, I am bait. Yeah. This is not going to be a good look, especially with, my current circumstances. And then seeing how things were just different on the news and seeing things that were going on in Hamden and things like that. I was like, it really is kind of, as you described, it's filtered in such a way that let's keep certain personalities, for lack of a better term, let's keep the animals inside. And that's the way that it's presented, unfortunately. But it's the reality. It's the reality that we've accepted. And it was funny because when the precursor to all of that, I was doing a podcast. I was recording a podcast when the original news about Freddie Gray came out, and we were just kind of, it was like normalized. Like, oh yeah, that's what the police do. They kill black people. That was literally the conversation we had at the podcast, and didn't know it was going to lead into that, and it became subject matter for the podcast that we were doing for like the next 2 to 3 months, and became a really big part of our lives. The stuff with what paper was it? I don't know which paper it was, but the nonsense that happened at Oriole Park around that time. Mm-hmm. My co-host was down there. He was like, yeah, that's not what happened. So we were kind of, from our vantage points talking about these things. And ultimately I'm saying all of this to kind of maybe look at podcasts in a very similar way as what a photojournalist does, in a sense. Mm-hmm. It's like, oh, well, you guys are saying this. Well, I have images that says the opposite. Or you guys are saying this. I have podcasts and information with people who are in the city, who are around the city, who are seeing this shit, and they have no reason to lie. You like, here's the truth, ultimately. Like this alternative kind of news and presentation piece. And I think that becomes like the news. That's the thing that kind of moves people, kind of makes things happen, because people will have a narrative that they want to run with, and then that's just a story until someone challenges it. Yeah. So speaking of podcasting and photojournalism, this is a backhanded segue for me. How's it been co-hosting the podcast?
We like it. We took a hit with COVID. We're up to 74 episodes, I think. Wow. And it's funny. My producer he just chimed in. It's so weird, man. So we couldn't do it all through COVID because we were recording out of Loyola University's radio station. And he was like, COVID, we couldn't go to university. So Elena and I, she has, we both teaching, and she has a family. So we kind of took a little bit of a hiatus for the COVID year. We got back into it. We got a few episodes out. She was editing at home. She was doing all the editing, but she's a professor at Stevenson. So we're on a little bit of a break now for the summer, but I'm hoping now that we're vaccinated to school, we have our cards, that we'll be able to get back into the studio and kick it off again in the fall at Loyola, and get back into because it's a weekly podcast. So we had a couple of speed bumps, and I know people have been doing it, podcasts all through COVID and stuff. But it's what we could handle mentally and stuff. So, we took a break, and but we got back to it. We got about 4 episodes in the past couple months. And then we're on we're always on summer hiatus because she travels around. So we're going to get back to it anyway in the fall, And
has that had any influence on your work, or has your work kind of made you more equipped to do that podcast, like the photojournalism, the photography work, and even your educational background as far as being an educator? Has that like served the podcast, and have the podcast served any of the stuff that you do outside of the podcast?
I don't think it has really influenced my work at all, because it's kind of a separate room in my head, right? Sure. I mean, the reason I started the podcast was because I got tired. Like I wanted a good photojournalism podcast, right? I mean, I have Baronak's like street photography stuff. He's got his, but outside of that, I couldn't find any. And when we started, this is almost 4 years now. You know, when we started, it was like two white dudes and their whiskey, and they're like, "What are you shooting with?" And no women, no photographers, nobody in the field, no photographers of color. And I wanted to get rid of all that. I wanted to talk to people in the field who were doing the work, and you know, kind of like not hobbyists and people doing it on the side, right? There's nothing wrong with that. There's a lot of photo podcasts that are for people who aren't doing it professionally. And I really wanted to talk to the documentary people. And then, you know, we talked to, you know, Brent Lewis, who started Diversity, the website for photographers of color. We talked to him. He was one of our first really big guests because he tweeted, and I follow him on Twitter. Most of my guests come from Twitter, by the way. DMs, really. It's the best. Yes. It's the only reason, one of the reasons I'm on Twitter. And when Black Panther came out, he did this fantastic thread on every single magazine cover that Chadwick Boseman was on was shot by a white photographer. Every single one. I know that look. This is why I was like, I happen to have a podcast and I would love to talk to you about this on. And he was on like the next day.
Nice.
And it was great. So, you know, he was like one of our big guests. And then it just, you know, we did, you know, when the Me Too movement, you know, Kristen Chick on Vox broke the Me Too story in photojournalism. We had her on and signed as the editor of Vox. So we're trying to keep up with these issues in photojournalism, not just be about what do you use and things like that. Like we did a 3-part series on, you know, shooting war. And one of the people we talked to for the series in the 3rd episode was with a doctor who specializes in PTSD for photojournalists and dealing with that. Yeah. That's what I mean. Like that's how, you know, that's how deep I wanted this to get, you know, that's how heavy I wanted this to get.
And that's the thing, like as a person, and I say this every time, but as a person that's been doing like podcasting for as long as I have, like more than a decade, I always look for like, what are you aiming for? Like I've taught, I've consulted, all of these different things. And I know very little about photojournalism, but what you described there, it's just like, oh, I can learn something from this instead of just listening to some people just ramble on. So I kind of just look at it like podcasts are there to entertain, inform, things like that. And I hope that, you know, this podcast does a little bit of that. And from what you were describing with, you know, 10 frames per second, that's what I'm hearing. So
yeah, hopefully. I mean, hopefully we do, you know.
So I got 2 more questions, and
sure,
one is the comic one I just added in. I had to retool it because I think it's a good one. But I'll hit you with this one. So I read that your struggle series is in the permanent collections you touched on earlier at Reginald Lewis Museum, and your work is featured in NPR, Rolling Stone, and so on. How do you define success, and is there a moment that really sticks out that you're really proud of?
Well, I mean, what's success, right? Like, you know, my book just came out from a publisher in New York. It wasn't Kickstarted or anything. I'm already thinking about the next project. You know, like I don't know what success means. You know, because I mean, when you start talking about I'm successful, then your ego starts to kick in, and when your ego starts to kick in, you start believing your own bullshit, right? Yeah. And then when you start believing your own bullshit, then your work starts to suffer because you think you don't have to work hard enough because you've already done it. So, I mean, what does success mean? You know, like it's a hard, I don't know. I mean, am I happy with pictures? Never. You know, like, I mean, really, you know, I always get I get such anxiety and stress. I never think that I do a good job on a gig. And I know that can sound just as arrogant as saying I'm great, right? Like always being like, I'm not very good. People are like, oh man, you're so great. And you're like, no, I'm not. And you're like, whatever. You know how dumb that sounds? Yeah. But it's kind of true. Like, I don't know what, you know, I mean, success to me is if my work is around in 50 years. I won't be here, but if it's around, then somebody be like, wow, he's pretty successful.
Yeah.
You know, because I don't care about having multiple buildings or multiple cars or multiple. I'm not a materialistic person, right? So I don't care about having things. I collect photo books, right? Yeah. That's it. That's my thing. But other than that, like, I don't know. You know, someone's like, you ain't making no money. I'm like, so. You know, I'm happy. You know, I'm happy to look at the books that I have. I'm happy to be able to like go out and take pictures. And if I want to wake up at 11 in the afternoon, I can. You know,
that sounds successful to me, though.
You know, I mean, right, but that's someone's definition of, you know, of success. And I mean, you know, the struggle series that I did, the series of portraits. I mean, you know, I got to go down to Freedom Summer and meet, you know, hang out, like legitimately hang out with Bob Moses and Dr. Bond and, you know, Ron Karenga and, you know, all these like, it was great. I was honored to get these portraits when I was down there, you know, and, you know, Reverend Dr. Lowry, you know, like all these portraits that I did. I mean, to me, that's success, right?
Yeah.
To me, to be able to hang out with those giants like that, you know, Fannie Lou Hamer's niece, you know, people like that. To me, that's success. When you're able to do that, I mean, that's my definition. Some people are like, I want a big car. Okay, that's your definition. I'm not judging anybody for their definitions.
I mean, I want to be able to do my podcast on gold microphones. That's how I'm going to deem success. Is like, yeah, you know, Big Rob is here with the gold mics.
Yeah, that's cool.
Not at all. I think you know, because you're a very straight shooter, and I think you're right. I agree with it, but it's kind of like, are you enjoying yourself, or do you still want to do it? Do you feel that you're getting these opportunities and you're getting something out of them, and you're able to just kind of have a life that feels comfortable? That's the way I kind of look at it, and I envy that from. I always look at like comedians and things like that. It's like, you guys just kind of get up and do an hour and then back to your room or whatever. I was like, I kind of envy that. I romanticize about that. And when you said wake up at 11, I was like, shit, I wake up at 6 every day. It's too much for me. But 11 sounds is enviable. Last question I have before we get into shameless plugs. So I had to look this up while we were talking, and I think I have a go. And this is comic related. Are you more of a Jimmy Olsen or Peter Parker?
I'm more of Friday Foster.
Okay. That's great. I'm here for it.
I mean, I guess Peter Parker, because he's independent, where Jimmy Olsen seems to rely on Superman.
He does.
Right? Where Peter Parker has to take his own selfies the whole time. Mm-hmm. Right? And he has to rely on his own stuff. Where Jimmy Olsen just, you know, he's relying on Superman. So I'd say that's Peter Parker. But Friday Foster is getting a reboot. That's why I put a plug in.
Oh, nice.
There's a new series coming out about Friday. That's a Pam Grier movie also.
I'm learning things right here. See, much appreciated here because I'm learning things.
Yeah, that's just that's old school.
Yeah, but Yaphet Kotto in there.
Yeah, check that. That's a very underrated Pam Grier, because you always get Coffee.
Like Foxy Brown or something.
Foxy Brown, yeah. But you never get Friday Foster. It never really pops up on anybody's radar.
Yeah, no. What's up? Carl Weathers in here? Oh man, yeah. I'm gonna check this out then.
Yeah, check it out.
So that's pretty much all the questions I had for this podcast. But this has been great. Shameless plugs. Where can he find your social media? All of that stuff. Since you're doing your Twitter thing and you're getting those guests. So yeah, put it out there. All your stuff.
Yeah. So my Instagram, I always get my Instagram and my Twitter mixed up. So the Instagram is JM Giordano. That's Giordano photo. JM Giordano photo is the Instagram. And then the Twitter is, I'm pretty sure, JMG Pix, PIX. But let me just check, because I get, again, like, it's like trying, you know, like I don't even know, like my wife's phone number is like her name in my phone, right? I don't even know what the number is. You know what I'm saying? So, yeah. Yeah. So my Twitter handle is @JMGPix. Yeah. So, That's those two. And again, yeah, I have a big solo show up at the Museum of Industry. This long-term project I'm working on about the collapse of the steel industry worldwide. And some of the Baltimore work is up in a solo show at the museum right now that reopens on Saturday. That's going to be up through September, I think.
That's good.
And then really get down. Let me pull up the info for let me pull up the info real quick for the Houston exhibit, which is coming up this weekend or next weekend, right on the 10th. So that's on July 10th, and that's going to be from 3 to 7. And then I'm giving a talk. I got last plug. I'm giving a talk at the Mobtown Ballroom that night, the night of the 10th. I'm giving a talk about the book We Used to Live at Night.
Okay. Yeah. Busy. You have these things coming up in July, so that's going to be good.
Yeah, and then I start my kind of summer camp with the kids is coming up the end of July, which I'm excited about.
That's fantastic.
So,
and they can see all of these kind of updates on your socials, right?
Yes, yeah. I'm going to be so this week. What I'm concentrating on is what I'm concentrating on this week is the opening of the Museum of Industry. And then starting Monday, I'm going to be really concentrating on the Lewis show because that's going to be a great show. I'm really psyched. We're getting jazz trumpeter Brandon Woody's going to be there.
Nice.
So it's going to be fantastic. And that is with, let me just make sure I give everybody all there. So that's Dee Dwyer, the photographer, Devin, Alan, and myself are the 3 photographers in that show.
Fantastic.
And that's in honor of Robert Houston.
Fantastic.
Which I'm psyched about. So
looking forward to it. Looking forward to seeing those next steps, see if I can pull up and be a part of the festivities.
Cool, man. Yeah, I hope you can make it out.
Absolutely.
Come out and hang out.
Oh, yeah. So that's all I got. And for the folks listening, there you have it. This has been great. This has been great.
I hope it lived up to the, because again, my favorite philosopher said, "Don't believe the hype."
That's great. That's great. So for Joe Giordano, I am Rob Lee saying that there's art in and around Baltimore. You just got to look for it.